Galahad. Dad loved farming. The land he rented had been neglected and was in poor shape. But with good farming practices, he felt certain he could make it into a good farm. What he did not know was the climate and the condition of farming in that part of Minnesota. The land was poor. The summer winds took their toll of moisture from the land. After the first year, the result of his hard work was disappointing. So it was when the newspapers announced in 1905 that the province of Alberta had been formed and surveyed into plots of 160 acres, which were open for homesteading purposes. For $10, 160 acres of land could be filed on, lived on, and at the end of 3 years, a title could be obtained. Dissatisfied where he was, and being of a pioneer nature, he was quick to take advantage of the newspaper announcement. He came to Alberta the same fall, chose the land he wanted, and filed on it. Returning, he prepared for the move to Alberta in the spring, keeping only the absolutely necessary stock, machinery, household effects, seed grains, and feed. He sold the rest by auction, and taking advantage of the colonization program offered by the CPR, whereby a car of settlers' effects would be moved from Edgerton, our town, to Daysland, Alberta, for only $27. He filled a car and, leaving us behind, headed for his homestead. At the same time Dad had filed on his homestead, he had also filed on land for Ross Taylor and Warren Allen, two of our American neighbors, and Uncle Fred. Uncle Fred ordered 2 cars for effects at Luverne, Minnesota, but only loaded one and a part of the other. The 2 cars were moved to Edgerton, where the second car was filled with stock, etc., by Uncle Ross and Warren Allen. Thus, all 3 cars were moved together to their destination. The cars arrived at Daysland on March 22nd, 1906. There were no roads, not even trails to guide them, but with one man on horseback driving the cattle up ahead, searching out a trail for the heavily loaded wagons over unfamiliar ground, with only the survey stakes to guide them. They arrived at Uncle Fred's homestead on March 25th. Building a shelter 12 feet by 24 feet to keep the seed grain dry, as well as house the furniture and be living quarters until each family house could be built, and fencing in a pasture for the cattle and extra horses was the first consideration. Then the families were sent for. When Dad loaded the car, he packed everything but a few old pots and pans and a few dishes. Only the straw mattresses were left to sleep on. Mother emptied these and packed them in a trunk when we were ready to leave. We stayed at the farm until Mother got word to come. We got our milk and eggs from Ms. Knoll, and I remember Ms. Knoll made a big batch of bread and cookies for us to eat on our trip. Mother packed 2 trunks with our clothes and what was left. Then we had an early supper, and Mr. Knoll took us to the station. Us children were older now, and with the trip 2 years earlier from Waterloo under our belts, we could handle ourselves without so much attention from Mother. We accepted the slatted seats and the method of satisfying our hunger without griping. Though the coaches rolled and jerked, we had no trouble sleeping. When we got on the train at Edgerton, the car was not crowded, but when we woke in the morning, the car was jammed, filled with the families of new homesteaders for Alberta and Saskatchewan. After a 60-hour ride, our train arrived in Calgary and was switched to the second track in front of a long wooden platform reaching the full length of our train. Everyone got off the train and carried their baggage across the track and piled it on the platform. Only a few people were met at the train. Most, as we were going further to get to our destination. It had been cold and windy when we left Edgerton. We had our coats on and were bundled up to keep warm. Even with all our warm clothing, the trip from Mr. Knoll's in the bobsleigh through the deep snowdrifts, we were chilled through when we arrived at the station. There was no snow in Calgary. It was warm and sunny. We took off our heavy coats and piled them on top of our baggage. In pairs, we walked up and down the platform while the others stayed and guarded our baggage. A big water tank on the west end of the platform, where the underpass on the first street now goes through. The station, about the same size as the one in Medicine Hat, with 2 large doors, opened up onto another platform at the edge of what is now 9th Avenue and Centre Street. About where the underpass on 1st Street East is, there was a big ice house, and just east of that was the freight shed. On the south side of the tracks between 3rd and 4th Street was the stockyards. Being spring, the stockyards were empty, except for a few horses. There were 4 low buildings on the south side of the track, painted the same color as the station. I asked a man who was getting out ice if the building were stores as I wanted to spend the nickel that was burning a hole in my pocket. He told me that was where the men working on the track stayed. These were the only buildings I could see through the trees, except about opposite the water tank there was a big 2-story rooming house. The rest was all trees. A road crossed the tracks west of the water tank. I didn't go as far as the road. On the north side of the station, on both sides of Center Street, was a Chinese cafe and rooming house. Next to the cafe, on the west side, was a harness shop. Then 2 other small shops. Then 2 large livery barns. Another rooming house next to the barns. I could only see a few shacks west of the rooming house because of the trees. East of the rooming house, on the east side of Center Street, were all little shops and cafes as far as the next corner where another livery barn stood. There was a large corral east of the barn. Then only shacks to where the Elbow River joined the Bow. There were no other buildings on the south side on 9th Avenue. Having heard so much about the savage Indians, we were careful to keep clear of the few Indians in their full dress who stayed around the station. 9th Avenue was crowded with teams, single buggies, and saddle horses. Trains were arriving and leaving, quite often with people getting off and on them. The platform near the track was crowded with people and baggage, so as we were not leaving until late in the evening, Mother had us move our baggage to the back of the platform where there was more room. It was still too early for dinner, though we were all hungry. Shortly after we had got settled down in our new spot, a man carrying 2 cans of milk came up the platform. Mother got out the kettle she had used to make tea on the train and had him fill it, which cost her 10 cents. Mother opened up the grip with the food in, and we had an early dinner. The fresh milk sure tasted a lot better than the sweetened tea we had been drinking on the train. The milkman came around again at supper time, so Mother got the kettle filled again for our supper. During the afternoon, Mother spread the coats down so Irene, Marshall, and Earl could take a nap. Leaving me to guard the baggage, she went for a walk around the stores on 8th Avenue. She brought back a big bag of peanuts for us. She said there was lots of things she would like to buy, but had no money. It was getting dark and cold, and we had to put on our warm coats by supper time. We had to jump around on the platform to keep warm, and were ready for another meal when we were told to get on the train. We had been waiting 12 hours before we got going again. The coach was crowded. Another woman shared our double seat with Mother and us 4 kids. how we all crowded into that small space and got any rest or sleep, I'll never know. But we did. We transferred to another train at Wetaskiwin and arrived in Daysland before we had breakfast. Dad and Uncle Ross were waiting for us with the Democrat and a double wagon. While Uncle Ross loaded the trunks and baggage, Dad built a fire and cooked up a big breakfast of oatmeal porridge, pancakes, eggs, and bacon. It was our first hot meal in weeks, it seemed, and we ate until we couldn't get another bite down. Good thing we did, because we didn't eat again until we made camp that night, a little more than halfway home. The three of us boys rode in the wagon, the rest in the Democrat. The trail was only a few wagon tracks. It was bumpy because of the hole and stones. The weather was warm and calm. Everything was new to us, and there was so much to see we didn't notice about it, only when there was a bad one. Uncle Ross named the different animals and birds when to us as we came to them. And there were lots. Gophers were everywhere and so tame, we nearly ran over them. We stopped and watched a badger dig himself out of sight, getting a gopher that went down a hole just ahead of him. Prairie chickens were everywhere. We would eat many of them before the year was out. Ducks were coming in and settling on the many sloughs we passed. We watched flocks of geese flying high over our heads, their honking call keeping our attention long after they had disappeared from sight. The small, partly white, partly brown rabbits sitting quietly at the edge of small clumps of bushes, then hopping away out of sight when we came near them. A porcupine crossed the trail ahead of us with its sharp quills standing straight up. Uncle Ross told us it would be easy for a man to kill it with a stick and eat it if he could not get food any other way. Buffalo had roamed over this heavy grass land only a few years before. The bleached heads were everywhere. Many of their buffalo wallows, where they rolled to cover themselves with dirt to protect them from the flies, could be seen along the trail. Their stools, 1 to 2 inches thick and 6 to 8 inches wide, covered the ground. Maggots, having eaten the food substance away, they were still light and well preserved. Buffalo chips, we called them. They were easy to light, burned hot, and no smoke. They burned like charcoal. Lighting a couple, then covering them with an armful of green grass, made a smoke smudge that kept the millions of mosquitoes away from early afternoon until the cool night air drove them down into the grass. They made a dandy fire to heat the tea pail and cook a quick meal when we got caught away from home. We camped in the shelter building until Dad got the garden patch ready, and about 10 acres broke and seeded. Then he built the sod house for us. It was crowded, but the thick walls and roof kept the inside cool during the summer and warm during the winter. We all worked hard and played with anything we could find to play with. Funny now, when I think of the contraptions we made and imagined the things they were supposed to be. What imagination a child has when it is allowed to run wild. Days seemed to be longer then. There was lots of time to go visiting our neighbors, who arrived almost daily. New kids had to be initiated into riding cows, or whatever animal was handy. Even to pigs. I often wonder if we were as tough as we thought we were. It took only a suggestion or dare to start us going in rain, snow, or sunshine. Lots of bruises, which nature or Vaseline soon healed. Lots of slivers, too, as we only wore shoes when the snow made it too cold to go barefoot. Coached by some of the young men, we learned to make cigarettes with pieces of newspaper, and when we couldn't get dried tea leaves, certain weeds and leaves ground fine was a substitute tobacco. It was awful tasting stuff when we could get it to burn. It only took a few puffs to satisfy our desire to be grown-ups. Pigweed greens and the turnips and spuds we had brought with us supplied the vegetables until our new garden was ready. Other than the salt pork brought with us, our meat depended on what could be shot. Dad was kept busy plowing and working land for some other homesteaders who were not equipped to do the work themselves, mostly bachelors, who went away to work during half the year and returned to do their resident requirements the other half. Nearly half the homesteaders were bachelors, which made the competition by foul or fair means for recognition by the unmarried girls available. Sometimes to court a girl was rough. Bloody noses were not uncommon. Dad reloaded all his shotgun shells, which made it much cheaper than buying new shells. But even with this, every shot had to count. Dad was a crack shot, and it was not uncommon for him to get 2 or 3 birds with a single shot. We had only been living in the sod house a few weeks when Mother corralled the other kids in the house and allowed me to take the shotgun and try my luck on a bunch of prairie chickens strutting their stuff on a knoll back of our house. I'd watched Dad shoot chickens lots of times, so I thought I knew how to do it, though I had never fired the shotgun before. I crawled on my belly through the low brush and long grass until I got close enough to see all the top of the knoll. Then, pushing the gun in front of me, I took aim and waited until 2 chickens got lined up in my sights. I pulled both hammers back with the intention, if I missed on the first shot, I could use the other barrel. When they were lined up just right, I pulled the trigger. The kick of the gun raised me off the ground. As I came down, I unconsciously pulled the other trigger. The pain in my shoulder was so bad, I was not sure if the barrel of the gun was pointed towards the chickens or my shoulder when I pulled the trigger. I looked for blood, but could not find any. My shoulder was numb. Leaving the gun on the ground, I got up and looked around for the 2 chickens I had aimed at. Much to my surprise and elation, I got those 2 chickens and 3 more. I must have got them with the second shot, just as they rose off the ground. My arm was so sore I couldn't carry the gun, so I left it. I gathered my birds and carried them proudly back to Mother. One was so badly shot up, it could not be used. It was only about 20 feet from me when I fired. From then on, when we were short of meat for a meal, I got the chance to fill the pot. It did not take long to learn when to crawl, when to stoop, or the best shooting range. One kind of meat can get monotonous, even fried chicken. To change the diet to roast duck, Dad often rolled me out at sunup on Sunday mornings to act as his bird dog. We did a lot of walking and crawling through a lot of willows, only to find there was no ducks on many of the sloughs. It was disappointing, but nothing to do but go on to the next. Usually, the ducks preferred the larger and deeper sloughs. This meant I had to wade out in the cold water to get the ducks, if Dad got any. I learned to swim, getting ducks out of deep water with my clothes on. There was no time to waste taking my clothes off when I was after a wounded duck. When I got back out, I nearly froze to death in my wet clothes, getting to the next slough or back home, depending on how many ducks we had. Why I didn't catch a cold, I don't know, but I didn't. Maybe the duck hunting helped prepare my system for the wet, muddy trenches. After I got the single-shot .22 rifle, that first fall I was able to add fool's hens, partridges, and bush rabbits to the menu. Rabbit stew in the winter tastes much like chicken, but in the summer the meat has a slight bitter taste from the green buds and bark they eat. Did you know that rabbits can make a loud crying sound? I didn't until one afternoon I was out on a rabbit hunt. I saw what I thought was a rabbit's eye looking at me from the middle of a clump of willow. I could not pick out the white body of the rabbit against the background of snow. I wasn't that good a shot then that I could hit the rabbit at all with only one eye to aim at. I watched it for a couple minutes until it moved on one of its ears. I was sure then that I could hit it. I fired and the crying started. I had heard of women leaving their babies for someone else to take care of. This came to my mind because it sounded just like a tiny baby crying. At the time, I did not think of where my shot had hit, only that the sound of my rifle shot had wakened the tiny baby. The sound seemed to be coming off to the side of where I had shot the rabbit. I could not leave and let the baby freeze in the cold now. Dropping my rifle, I hurried toward the sound. I found only a badly scared and wounded rabbit. I had missed the eye, but the shot had ripped through the top of the neck, just ahead of the shoulders. When the shot hit him, he had leaped in the air and landed nearly 10 feet from where he had been sitting. The pain must have caused him to cry out because he could not move from where he had landed and was helpless. Of all the rabbits I shot afterwards, I never heard that crying sound again. It was really eerie. Irene can tell of our goose hunt south of Coronation and me trying to shoot geese from the hood of her car when she drove 40 miles an hour over a plowed field straight into a flock of geese feeding near a straw stack. She kept shooting. Shoot! Shoot! Hell, with her going that speed, I had all I could do just hanging onto the windshield, and my good foot caught in the headlamp. Sprawled out as I was on the hood of the car, I couldn't even get the gun to my shoulder, let alone shoot. Larry asked why I hadn't got a goose. He couldn't see from where he was the position I was in. Irene wanted to try it over again on another bunch of geese. They were landing in bunches around the many straw stacks. No thanks. That once was enough for me. We might have done better if I had strapped the gun to the hood and pulled the trigger with a string from the front seat of the car. I would not have my hands full trying to keep from being thrown off. Well, I can assure you, there are less dangerous ways to shoot geese. I went hunting geese with Dad and Uncle Ross one cold fall day. The geese were coming in big flocks down a coulee to to land on the river. The ground was fairly level for quite a distance from the river to the steep, high banks. With Uncle Ross on one side of the coulee near the top of the bank, and Dad the same on my side, and me hidden in some bushes on the top edge of the coulee to signal when the flock was coming. We waited. I saw a big bunch coming and signaled. They both stood up to get a good shot away. Uncle Ross must have been standing on a kind of ledge, but not Dad. He must have been hanging on with his toes. Certainly nothing solid under his feet. When he fired, the kick of the gun knocked him off balance. He dropped the gun to catch his balance. There was nothing but grass to grab hold of. It was sure a comical sight, watching Dad with his arms and legs flailing the air as he went tumbling head over heels down the bank. It was only funny for me until he stopped rolling and lay still. It was such a long way down, I was sure he was hurt. I ran along the bank and got the gun, then scrambled and slid down to Dad. He was okay, only mad. The geese kept coming and Uncle Ross kept shooting. Dad grabbed the gun and started shooting as well. What Dad forgot was that the geese were a lot higher up from the bottom of the bank than what they were when he was shooting at them from his slim perch at the top of the bank. They only came in for a few minutes, then all was quiet, and we started gathering up the harvest. Out of the 10 we picked up, only one, shot through the head, was dead. The others had broken wings. Boy, can they ever cover ground, even with a broken wing. And mean, too, when they were cornered. They made good use of the good wing, as we found out from the number of welts we got. They can hide good, too. After we had gathered all the birds we could find, Uncle Ross decided to search the low bushes again along the edge of the water. He was walking along, pounding the bushes, when suddenly, a few feet back of him, a goose dived into the river. He jumped in, shoes and all, after it. Both shotguns were back with the pile of geese. If he'd had a gun, he would have shot it again, but he wasn't going to let it get away. The river was swift, and the goose was a good swimmer. So was he. It was nip and tuck until they were crossing a wide, shallow gravel bar that extended across the river. He was able to run then and caught the goose. He looked like a drowned rat. It was getting dark and cold by the time we got the geese loaded in the wagon up on top of the riverbank. Uncle Ross shivered in his wet clothes all the way home. He got warmed up after each of them had taken large shots of Dad's cold remedy, hot brandy. Mother got a lot of down for her pillows, and we ate the last of the geese the next spring. Aunt Minnie and Mother believed me when I told them about Dad tumbling down the riverbank, which Dad emphatically denied, and warned me if I was going to make up stories like that on him, he wouldn't let me go hunting with him again. And he also hinted that he could tell some stories on me. True stories too, if he took a notion. Uncle Ross had his 2 front teeth missing. He was continually chewing payroll plug tobacco. Instead of spitting, he squirted the juice through the missing teeth. He would be walking along and ready to let a squirt go, but first he would glance down to find a flower, blossom, or a chip to squirt at. 9 out of 10 times he hit it. He always got up before the sun. He would light the lamp, then build up a roaring fire. He would pull on his pants, take a chew of tobacco, open the heater door, pull the rocking chair over beside the lamp, and enjoy an hour's quiet reading before he had to do the chores. Instead of using a spittoon, he rocked back and forth, squirting the tobacco juice through the open stove door into the flames. He missed the door sometimes, and the room would be filled with that awful smelling smoke. No matter how often Aunt Minnie washed the stove, there was always brown juice marks on it. I believe Aunt Minnie easily held the record for the time it took to get a live chicken cooked and on the table. One day, she was over visiting Mother. When it was time to go home, I went along. When we drove into the yard, she said, "Go get me a good-sized rooster." We will have fried chicken for supper. I jumped out of the wagon and pulled out my lucky slingshot. I picked up a pebble and went down to the barn where the chickens were. By the time she came with the team, I had picked out the rooster. She said that one would be okay. I was already lined up, so let go and over tumbled the chicken. She wrung its head off and had it skinned by the time she got to the water trough where she washed it out. She put the skillet on the fire, then cut the chicken up and put it on to cook. I'm sure the chicken was not dead when she put it in the pan because the legs and wings moved and twisted in the pan. By the time she got the plates and bread and butter on the table, the chicken was cooked, ready to eat.